And we are live. All right. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to How Business Leaders Can Prepare for Inflation. So, one of the big news items, let me go this way. One of the big news items I'm seeing all over the Wall Street Journal, I've seen a little bit in Harvard Business Review, is inflation's coming, that we're starting to see increases. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal this week, I think, that 36% of the cost of materials for housing is going up. And I'm sure some of that's due to some of the problems they're having in terms of their acquiring materials and things like that because of COVID, but some of that's just inflation with the amount of money that's been put into the system. And so we're going to have a discussion today about that. And let's get into it just a little bit. Before we get started, I want to do a quick introduction. And to do that, I'm taking them off the screen. First, we have here Dan DeGolier. And Dan is the founder of Ascent CFO Solutions. He and his team provide benefits of an experienced chief financial officer on a part-time or fractional basis. They work with fast-growing companies and manage all aspects of the accounting and finance and build it right the first time. And then we have, unfortunately, Mike King. His computer died right before this, and so he cannot make it. Mike, we'll miss you, but hopefully we can get you on the next one. I didn't even have enough time to take him out of the presentation, folks. I'm sorry about that. But we also have Ernie Villani. He is Ernest on LinkedIn, so you have to look for him that way. And he is the founder and owner of Boulder Valley CPAs. He's been in the public accounting field since his teen. I like teens, and I like to joke, if you wanted your taxes prepared by a teenager in 1985, he was your man or teen for that. All right. He takes on the role of a trusted advisor for his clients. He helps them create a plan for success and guides them through the decision-making process. So quickly about me, my name is Mike Black. I'm the CEO and managing partner of Page Black. We're an integrated marketing firm. I'll talk a little bit more about us, but we will not bore you with those details. I guess I am going to bore you slightly at first. There are a couple problems we solve typically for middle market companies. And this is what it looks like for a CEO is the marketing department always wants more money to try new tactics, but they're just not seeing the results. They know they're better than their competition, but don't understand why their competitors just get more attention. Marketing's not consistent. It just doesn't happen. It's not measured, or it's just not effective. They know their current customer base doesn't even understand everything that they can do for them. And finally, they want to expand into a new market or a new target market, and they don't have a plan. We can help with all those issues. All right, next month, we have a webinar coming up, and it's digital transformation and the customer journey. So we're going to talk about how do you really build a great customer journey for your best clients and get more of your clients in there, and then how do you build the technology underneath. We're bringing in a partner to talk about that, and I'm excited about that. That's June 8th at 10 a.m. So let's get started with today's. I'm going to move us over to this. We're going to start with today's question. And my first question for people out there is that if you're a business leader and you're thinking, geez, yeah, I'm hearing all about this inflation stuff, but I have no idea what data I should be looking at, we're going to talk about that first. So we'll bring in Ernie. I know you had some opinions about this when we were kind of in the pre-show. What are the things you as a business owner are looking at? And then Dan, we'll have you chime in afterwards.
I think the one thing I'm staying away from is trying to explain to people what quantitative easing is, because I think it just blows their mind. And so getting them to understand that the government is kind of printing money at this point at an unprecedented rate, and the governments around the globe are doing that. But what we're doing really is just working on educating people. You and I had talked about how since the turn of the century, inflation has rarely peaked above 4%. And so we have an entire generation of business owners who are unaware of or yet to come to grips with what inflation even means as a thing. And so we're just going through an educational process to let them know that what's triggering these kinds of things are governmental proposals to increase minimum wage, to boost unions, and to create spending, right, for infrastructure and things like that. And so this is all a very novel idea and circumstance for a lot of business owners.
Right. And I remember, Dan, I'll bring you in a second, but that really just triggered me thinking about in the 70s when I was growing up. I'm sure you guys had this same experience since we're similar age. I remember my parents getting a mortgage, and I think they were pretty happy when they got a rate of 13%. And today that would be an astronomical figure. So what what I'm seeing is a part of this. Well, actually, Dan, I don't want to say what I'm seeing because I'm actually the non-financial guy here. I might be represent the sales and marketing wing of the company. What's the data that you would be watching?
I mean, the classic things you're going to be seeing on the news, the CPI index and consumer spending, interest rates, all those things. But I think the key thing is to really, run your business in such a way that you're just watching all of your metrics, right? We work with all kinds of companies that are in all different sizes, all different stages of their own growth. And I think it's just important to really stay focused on your business, what's happening with your pipeline, where things are going on, and your costs. Because if you are, going to be a lot different if you're a manufacturing company or a home builder, right? Where all those sort of costs you're going to be affected directly by inflation. Other companies, software companies and services companies, aren't going to have those same material costs, but you're going to see the overall inflationary ecosystem. People are going to be higher demands for wages, right? Wages are people going to expect to, as interest rates go up and as other costs are going up, they're going to want to see higher wages. There's going to be wage pressure and things like that. So, I think it's kind of keep an eye on the overall ecosystem and try to stay ahead of the curve a little bit.
Yeah,
right. Did you have an additional piece, Ernie, or no?
Oh, I agree. I still feel like I keep coming back to we're sharing a lot of education with people and discussing like what a pricing strategy means and that simply raising your prices in reaction to inflation is probably not a good long-term solution, and that there are other means. They can lock in long-term contracts on their side on the purchases that they're making,
right?
Things to improve cash flow, right? And to reduce operating expenses to provide a greater level of stability to weather the storm.
All right. So Dan was talking about CPI index, I think, it makes sense if you're seeing the cost of materials, your supply chain costs are coming up as a manufacturing company, but as a service company, the link for me that I pictured in my head, and you two tell me if I'm wrong, is I'm hearing like, okay, everything's getting more expensive. I'm used to being able to buy and look at houses that cost this much or go to restaurants that have this level of service, and it's more expensive now. So I need more money, and I'm going to go to my employer and say, hey, everything's more expensive. I want the same lifestyle that I had 5 years ago or 2 years ago. I need more. I need a raise. And that's what people can anticipate happening. Is that how that trickles in, or is there another path if I missed it?
I mean, it does trickle in that way. Getting ahead of all of that information, I think, as things are unfolding as quickly as they are, that's the harder part of all of it.
Right. And I think even more that people are looking, there came out on LinkedIn, I think it was this morning, about how many people are looking for work. So that even creates more vulnerability. So if your stability in your team is important, this is definitely something you should watch. All right. And I appreciate, Ernie, you getting into what people should do. So we are going to... Actually, I'm going to do a quick advertisement before we move to our next question, and that is next week we are talking about exactly what Ernie just mentioned. It's streamlining operations in the middle market companies. And so we're bringing a couple of experts in to talk about like what is it that you need to be doing to streamline those operations and how can you reduce costs and manage costs. And then our next question for our panel is, are there any steps that business owners should take right now? And Ernie, let me shift over to this. You got us started with that conversation, talking about, we'll lock in some of your costs. Are there any specifics you'd add right now? And then Dan, I'll have you respond.
Yeah, I mean, some of it was already brought on by COVID, and where people are using virtual offices and allowing staff to work from home, not signing long-term rental agreements, right? And locking into a facility expense that they're not going to get the most value out of, relocating to smaller places, using, and within the boundaries of the law, using contract labor, right, to meet short-term objectives without really permanently growing your salary expenses. Renegotiating. COVID definitely brought on an onslaught of conversations to renegotiate prices, people renegotiating their rent. They were given flexibility on their mortgage payment, looking at untapped cash to eliminate unnecessary financing expenses, right? To cut all of those costs as well. And politely asking for discounts wherever you can get one.
All right,
Yeah,
fair.
Yeah.
I agree with all those cost cutting approaches, and I think that looking occupancy, real estate costs being a high cost for a lot of companies, so just regardless of industry. But I agree with Ernie. I think that and maybe you do want to. I'll take maybe a counterpoint a little bit, and maybe you do want to look at a long-term lease as long as you can get a really good rate. But
Totally.
everything that I'm hearing is that we are seeing, my understanding is that real estate is somewhat of a lagging indicator, right? So we haven't seen the bottom. We see this whole, as leases are coming up for renewal, that 3-year and 5-year leases, in which there's very much of a bull market, are now we're going to see those more people working from home, less demand, still the same amount of supply or even increasing supply. I would think that there'd be price. So maybe there's a chance to renegotiate that lease now. If you've got 2 years left on your lease, maybe you go back and negotiate for 3 or 4 years, but you want to get a lower rate that's more closer to market, I think is an interesting approach. But I want to bring up another thing to sort of look at things you might look at sooner than later, as far as you see inflation coming around the corner, is your own pricing, is how you're pricing to customers. If there's an opportunity, whether you're a services business, whether you're in a software business, software as a service, whether you're manufacturing, e-commerce, it's pretty much in almost any industry, start looking at, are there areas you can increase your prices so you're in front of it, so you're not being reactionary. You can be a little bit in front of your own revenue and looking for opportunities to maybe carefully increase prices in certain areas, and look at the structure of your contracts and things like that.
All right. Yeah. That's so my next question, and you just kind of got us started on it. I'm going to pop over and we'll get to it, but you talked about what people should be doing. And this is one of the things that I think that people should be doing is, Dan, what you talked about. And maybe we can dig into that just a little bit more. What should people be doing over the next, 30 to 60 days? And I think one of those things is looking at how are you going to increase prices? If you don't have a plan in now on regularly increasing your prices, is that something companies should be looking at regardless of all of this, is one of my questions.
I think so. I think you should always be, you want to, there's certain areas are more competitive than others, whether you're, the book behind me here, but if you're competing in a blue ocean, it's a lot different than if you're competing in a red ocean, and whether or not what kind of margin pressure you have and things like that. So I think it's, important to always understand your margins, understand different cohorts of your revenue, and understand where you have the ability to raise prices. And that should always be something you're looking at, is where you can do that. And in some industries you can, depending on what your customer base looks like. There's certainly areas where that's not feasible, but it should be a highly iterative thing you're always looking at.
Right. And there should, I think, some level of expectation. If you're not in an industry where you increase margins by becoming more efficient, then you probably need to be you need to be looking at how you're going to raise your rates on a regular basis. I have a friend, he's grandfathered certain clients of his in from a 5-year ago cost when it was very low, and it's really started. And now they've got this expectation after 5 years that he's never going to increase their prices. And I think that's a real challenge, because he's raised prices across the board to 5 times what they were then. And yet he has these people that he can't replace. So that's tough. Ernie, what are your thoughts about what people should be doing over the next 30 to 60 days? I know we've talked a little bit long-term, and then I'm going to follow up with a sales question around how sales needs to collaborate with you guys.
I am in Boulder County, so being a little touchy-feely is kind of comes with the territory, but and I'm going to butcher his name, but Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Why.
Start with why. Yep.
I really think people, when they're thinking about pricing, really need to figure out what that question really is all about, because even prior to inflation, people have reactionary approaches to adjusting their pricing, right? Especially service-based businesses, where we create this belief system around what our value is, and lo and behold, by the time we actually collect a payment from a client or a customer, that dollar amount looks completely different. And so I think inflation is just going to make people scramble that much more about, have they really put a lot of wisdom into their pricing structure or their pricing strategy for those kinds of things. And I think that as the world is talking about this now, it's time to pay attention to it and ask some of these larger questions around why.
That's a great point, Ernie. I think really understanding your value proposition, and how you can, increase value and pinpoint and target those value added services, I think it ties in really well. And I think, I'll put another plug in for Simon Sinek and start with why. That's really something I've really embraced is his approach on how you understand your own business.
Indeed. So it was not too touchy-feely then, right?
Well, I'm in Boulder County too, so yeah.
Okay, my mistake was inviting guys from Boulder County. It's over. No, I'll even say, so this is a part of what we get involved in with this a little bit, is that people, often business owners, they may even understand their why from their perspective. They don't necessarily understand the value from the client's perspective. And that's something we dig in, and I don't want to pitch us, and that's not my goal with this. I was on a call, it was fascinating. I was on a call with the CEO of a medical device company on the East Coast. And he talked about how they had brought this company, before they brought him on to do a turnaround, they were thinking of their technology as something that could be more cost effective than the current solutions. And it turns out there was a whole value proposition that was completely unrelated to that would actually increase the margins of their potential clients. And they were able to start selling and beat the competition and sell their machines for what was like 3 times or 5 times the value of the current market. And because they did not understand the value to their market and they had not researched that, they were potentially just positioning as kind of a commodity. And they were the exact opposite. They were actually revolutionizing their industry. And so it really is important that you start with why. Great, let's do that. Dig in and talk to your customers. Really understand that value. And that goes into that, how do you increase your prices? Because if you're going to increase your prices, no matter what the industry is, you need to position that on value. Instead of you tell them your costs are up, that's not really compelling for your clients to hear. My costs are up, so I'm going to raise your rates. Is not a compelling way to do it. It's we've done this much better for you.
Focus on the value.
And as a result, that's right. Yeah. Dig in and focus on the value. Probably a bunch of business owners that are just laughing at me for saying that, because that's what they do all day long. So, all right. So I'm going to get our next question in, and we may end a bit early because we're just kind of cruising through, and that's okay. But our next question is talking about, increasing rates and prices. So let's talk about, and this is what I was after with this, and I'll just read it. So how should business leaders start preparing their teams and customers for an increase in cost? So let's talk about the process, because I think there's probably a gap between you guys in the financial area hearing, hey, this is where we are, and then being reactionary. As you guys mentioned, a lot of business owners can be reactionary, and particularly in the service industry, they need to get ahead of this by maybe 3 months for marketing and sales to have an impact. So hopefully my goal was, when I put this together, is let's figure out what the data is. Let's figure out what that looks like and talk about what some of the plans look like. But now let's talk about how sales and marketing need to collaborate with the financial arm of the company. And so, how much lead time would you guys see in terms of needing to increase rates or prices? And what does that look like? And how should people think about that so they can then communicate that to sales and marketing?
I think it's extremely dependent upon the industry and upon the size of the company and the customer base. I don't know if there's an easy answer for that. I think that starting those discussions, looking at when your last increase was, starting to engage, as I think about my own business, as we engage with our clients and think about, where the value is. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I come back to that, focusing on that value side and where you're providing the most value, and remind them of, in our case, the money we save them by streamlining operations, or by improving processes, or all the many other ways that we're helping folks. We want to, kind of point that out, give them a heads up, let them, use that as a big part of, that explaining that value prop, and so you can start to lay the groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
I had an experience yesterday, actually, that I think fits with this, in that nice sized company, $25 million a year in sales, very well developed operations department, technology and marketing, and sales, and had spent the past 2 years building a very solid budget and a very solid budget process, except for one thing. Nobody was getting any feedback after they had built their budget and submitted it to the finance department. Right? So these people who don't really understand a lot about budgets in the first place, put all of this work, all of this effort, right, into it. And over the past 2 years, have been given no feedback, right, on the budget versus actual, even as a start.
Why even bother?
Right. and so here you have like, you had a very conservative COO, right, who is paying attention to inflationary fears, and he's actually nervous and concerned. And then you have a CMO who lives by this belief that the more fuel you pour on the fire, the faster and further you'll go. Yet she's not getting any feedback on whether she's meeting her budget restrictions or hitting her targets. And then the technology guy is also just, he's not asking any questions because he's been given free rein to just buy equipment all the time, right? And so nobody's been tracking how equipment purchases have been going up throughout the organization. So I think that people are not getting information fed back to them so that they can make informed decisions, even if it's just within the silo that they operate in their company. And this is a screaming call to action to start to coach your leadership within your existing organization about all of this.
Right. So that lack of collaboration really places them at big risk.
Yeah, no feedback.
They're not able to respond at all. They don't even know there's a problem.
No.
Or if there may or may not be one. Yeah. And then it's disincentivizing. Dan, your face says you have a story like that.
No, I was just going to say it just sounds negligent. I mean, it's like it seems like a complete waste of time. And without the feedback, what's the point of even doing that? I mean, the whole reason to do a budget or a forecast is to continue to iterate and learn from it and make it valuable. We're huge fans of the 3-year rolling forecast. We help our clients do the rolling forecasts more so than the budgets. I mean, the budgets are great, a point in time, but for a high growth company, budgets can be irrelevant by the time they're published, right? And so I think that, but understanding, doing a forecast to actual every single month, and understanding, and you learn from that. You learn from where you missed, and do you need to start increasing costs in different areas, and understand the cash flow. We're very focused on, we work with everything from bootstrap companies to venture-backed companies to private equity and family office owned companies, and regardless of whether you're a highly profitable company or whether you're venture backed and burning money every month, you need to really understand those cash flows. If it's venture backed and you're going to raise your next round, you want to know what your runway is and when your cash out date is, and how that's being affected by decreasing sales or increasing costs, and having visibility into that. But even high growth profitable companies can have issues with cash flow constraints because they grow too fast and bring on people too quickly, and the receivables start to lag. You can hit cash flow crises there as well. So I think that's where I guess I would pull in the discussion around some debt as well. If you've got to making sure you've got that line of credit, try to get that financing, that line of credit, the revolving term loan when you don't need it, right? That's classic statement is it's a lot easier to raise money, debt or equity when you don't need it. So that's, I guess, the other thing I would pull into this whole discussion around 30, 60, 90 days is look, make sure you've got that cushion, whether it's a line of credit or whether it's cash reserves, be in front of it.
Yeah, we couldn't even get to a forecasting conversation because they didn't even know where they landed last year. Right.
That's not
so it was just like,
well, luckily they have you now, Ernie. You're going to go in and fix all that.
Yeah, it was kind of a heavy sigh moment, so to speak, especially when so much energy goes into something and then it just dies on the vine.
So how does that happen? To some degree, I'm thinking, gosh, it must have been a small company. The CEO or the management team is thinking, gosh, we really need to understand our numbers better. Everybody's got to do a budget. Then they start that process and it's coming in and they're like, this data is great. And they haven't really thought through, how can I then leverage that further? Is that maybe is that how people get to that?
I mean, in this very specific instance, the team really had not been, they grew significantly, probably more than doubled in size in a 4-year period. And there was very little training on how to work together as a group in this regard, how to create goals, how to generate performance-based incentives from those goals, how to measure it, right? How to communicate amongst the team and then push that information up. They were just running as fast as they possibly could to stay ahead of the growth. And they'll be good. They're all on board with fixing this ill, but I think between rapid expansion, pushing people outside of their normal circumstances, like making them work from home for a year, Zoom is great, but oh my gosh, does it create a breakdown in some vital communication just around the idea that people can't just pop into a conference room and just whiteboard, right? Like just grab the leadership team and share an idea and flush out the potential outcome in an instant, right? Collaboration, I think, really kind of struggled a lot.
Okay. Fair. Thank you. Yeah. I just always, one of the reasons I do these is I feel like I have so much to learn about business still. So I'm always trying to bring in people smarter successfully. So today.
Same here.
So, yeah. So just so I can learn and figure out,
Thanks,
learn
Dan.
more. Yeah. There. So we all just decided that Dan's the smartest guy in the room today. I appreciate that.
No pressure.
All right. So if we're looking at increasing prices, one of the things I think is, this from my perspective is kind of on the sales and marketing side. If we're going to do that, I want I want kind of a 3-month run of information. I want to be able to not just react and announce it, but I want to have a 3-month window where I can begin to talk about value ahead of time. I don't necessarily have to give them the heads up that we're going to raise prices. That's really a decision that you have to make strategically do we do that now or do we do that right before it happens? Or do some people talk about how they just do it and they don't worry about it? But I think you need to start hammering on value like you guys talked about. How realistic is it to get 3 months in this kind of scenario? I mean, and I know, Ernie, in this company that you just mentioned, probably not, because they're still figuring out how to get all their communication information distributed throughout the company. What's a typical situation, though?
They're doing some things. I think they're doing one. So they're a membership-driven organization and really focusing in on the quality of the membership to make sure that group, right, really the lifeblood of their organization depends on the quality of the membership. So they are taking far more steps to raise quality control, right? So that they're not just accepting fly-by-night applications from people. I don't know that 3 months is long enough, only because about 4 years ago as a firm, we switched over to value-based billing for our corporate clientele. And it was a year-long information campaign to explain to people that the time-honored approach of time is our stock and trade was no longer the case. And it some people who were in professions or industries that had already made that move forward were very cool with it. People who had never experienced it before were completely blown away by it. They just didn't think that's how CPAs work. So I think it is very industry specific and how your customer or client base has been trained. Because some of them might be blown away. Some of them might say, man, it's about time you did that because I'm getting tired of being nickel and dimed. I'd rather just pay you what the value of your service is.
Yeah,
Right, so
I like that.
Go ahead, Dan.
I'll hop in. I'll say so what you just described, Ernie, is kind of a paradigm shift, right? You're not just
Yeah.
we get law firms. I get one of the law firms we do a lot of work with. Once a year they just send you an email and say, oh, here's the new pricing, here's the new rates for all the partners and the associates and everybody else in between, and then that's just the rates are what the rates are, and I guess the law firms tend to price that way. But what you've talked about by doing a value-based approach is kind of changing the paradigm, changing a shift. So I think that does require a longer lead time, but I think it also I think it's important to point out that sort of just changing the rules and changing the whole structure, changing the tiers. Let's take a subscription-based pricing thing. You have, let's say, a software. You're providing some software, and you have a certain number of seats. Well, instead of making the first tier 100 seats, you make the first tier 200 seats or 150 seats. There's so many factors behind beside just a flat rate that you can look at. I think you can be pretty creative. I was fortunate enough to work with a really strong sales leader earlier in my career, and he just loved playing with those tiers and those structures and those different ways to just turn the dynamic on its head. Offer something that, if you offer one other feature into your solution, but that you make a big deal out of that and make, not with, you don't want to be deceptive, but like by adding one feature that maybe is really important to some, not important to others, but because that's now bundled in, that's why you just increase your prices 35%. Because it now has this feature and you can't really carve that piece out anymore. There's, some gamesmanship and some chessboard playing that can be utilized here.
I think you also just reminded me of the things that made me cry alone in the dark after I made that decision, was that there was a paradigm shift externally to what the clients needed to hear. But internally, we're still going through that paradigm shift. I have CPAs and accountants who work here who, as we try to explain to them that we're moving in this value-based direction because it's more in tune with the advisory services that we feel very strongly need to occur, I'm getting just as much wide-eyed, almost frightened looks from internal people who have been doing things a certain way for 20 years. And they're just like, they don't even know what I'm talking about sometimes. And you can see the concern on their face as we're having this conversation. And some of them actually are not going to make it. And we'll have to move in different directions.
Interesting.
Right. Not that they will see this video. If it's you, we're sorry. So that said, I guess you guys are making me think about this, that the inflation's coming and that's going to shift the market. And everything's already shifting with us coming out of COVID and getting back at least in partially in person or in some sort of hybrid model. What is, if we have a savvy business leader and they're starting to think about, well, gosh, these things are coming, what are some of the questions they should ask themselves? And I didn't prep you for this, so I'm sorry if I'm just catching you flat-footed. What are the questions they should be thinking about if they're looking at a paradigm shift in their company?
I'm going to fall back on what Dan said, was securing cash, right? If you've got access to capital and you're going to go through this paradigm shift, I think you've got to be willing to deal with some kind of shrinkage or actually increased cost, like what we're doing on the marketing side, right? Even myself as a CPA knew so very little, right, on how to market this paradigm shift. And that's costing good money, right, to do that. So securing the access to that cash is, I think, important.
So be ready for rough seas is what I'm hearing is one of the pieces. Yeah. Dan, what were you going to say?
Another way, another approach I would take as well is to, maybe don't jump in with both feet with the paradigm shift, test it, try it out with a few clients, find some clients that you have a really strong relationship with and say, hey, here's what I'm planning to do. What do you think about this approach here? We want to, we want to approach the way that we engage with you a little bit differently. Again, I'm coming from my own perspective as a services provider, but we want to look at this approach here and what do you think, and try it with some, do it, almost like A/B testing, but with your existing client base, right? To test it, try it out, because if it's a completely horrible idea, you'd like to learn it, you'd like to find that out before you shift your entire business that way.
So I think that's solid gold, and I feel so good to hear you say that, because that has really, I picked up and moved out to Colorado about 11 years ago. And ever since coming out here, my whole approach is to share things with a small group of people, almost like a control group, really even just to get my pitch in place, right? And how I'm going to talk about this ad nauseum to hundreds of people. And it helped me really take an approach like that has worked very well. And COVID brought on other shifts as we start to consider third-party resources to help us process data is another whole shift that we're now slowly rolling out to our client base so that we can manage the feedback. Right.
So don't jump in with both feet before they go for it. That was not a good switch. I want us to go there. Sorry, guys. I just was thinking I was going to say something and I realized I'm not.
I'm stealing that from Dan for sure.
There you go. So I mean, one thing to avoid is to jump in with both feet, and that suggests to me a planning process. Is think through, how are we going to start doing this? Who are we going to start talking to about this? What's the value if we approach this new model and all of that? And we've gotten way away from inflation, but I think these are all good questions to be thinking about anyways.
Anybody else? We're about the same age. Anybody else just think New Coke for a minute there?
As a kid, I just got disabused of this. As a kid, I swore that was a marketing ploy because they got so much attention. Yeah. With the switch and then the demand and the being forced to go back. But absolutely, I remember New Coke and the fiasco that it was. It was like unbelievably powerful in that age that it was that pervasive in terms of everybody experiencing. And if you're not, if you don't know, if you're younger,
25, 30 years later, and it just popped into my head now.
Right.
Yeah, that's how pervasive it was. If you're younger and you don't, and sorry, we're picking on you if you're younger, but go look up New Coke and the fiasco that it was. It was unbelievably powerful. All right. If you were to give people, as they're thinking about, gosh, I think inflation's coming, what is the one thing they must do? Look at today.
I go back to, I think, repeat what we said earlier, and that's make sure you understand your cash, understand your cash reserves, your access to capital, debt or equity capital, and be prepared to make changes to adapt.
Mm-hmm. All right, fair. Ernie, what do you have?
I agree. I think one area that I don't really touch on a lot with a lot of clients because we're just not in that realm, but we do have clients that have significant inventory costs, and I think a lot of them fly blind to that. I think they can generally take this is what I think our inventory is right now, and I don't think they really have managed or dug into the details of inventory costs and what inflation can do to that.
Right. So then all of a sudden the cost of goods sold just, goes up big.
Right.
And if they lag on that, that could put them out of business.
It could. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's often overlooked and again, we haven't really experienced a lot of inventory fears for almost 2 decades. So you can have people that have been doing this rocking and rolling for years and not have to adjust to this experience. Right.
If you started working in the last 20 years, this isn't something you've faced this has not been a significant pain. No. So that absolutely makes sense. And I think that's really valuable advice. My thought, just walking away and hearing everything I've heard, I think 2 things for business leaders that I'm not going to try and echo financial advice because I'm not a financial guru. But what I think is that one, you need to be touching base with your team about where they are, because this is all going to trickle in, and that, you don't want turnover on your team at a time when labor's already in short supply. It's already hard to hire people and you just lost your best player. So you need to be in touch and making sure you're on top of that. And then the other side is be in touch with your customers and understand the value you provide and hammer that now. Even if you don't know what you're going to do, make sure you're hammering on that value that you provide to them. Understand that deeply. Read the book. Start with why, if that's what you need to do. But get on that, because that allows you more time if you're reacting. You've already started to build that relationship. Ernie, you had a comment, and then
I was just going to say also to give Dan a plug and his profession a plug. Know when it's time to bring somebody who can tell you something you don't know. And the CFO role, I think, is something that people dance around for a long period of time and don't get valuable insight or feedback or direction, right? Or a steady hand that they're going to need now more than ever. And maybe they're super well suited to weather this storm. But wouldn't it be so much better to come out stronger, right, than when you went into it? And I think people,
great point,
they skip over that expertise because they just look at it as some kind of cost that they don't want to absorb.
I mean, Mike, it's actually in one of our previous discussions when we first saw the pandemic coming down, where you had the most optimistic approach, and this was a year, April, May last year when we're starting to shut down and with so many questions what's going on, and you took an approach that resonated with me, which was, hey, look at this as an opportunity. How can we do better? How can we use this change, this new reality with COVID and pandemic? How can we take a different, use the paradigm shift in our own ways to take an approach and use it as an opportunity and utilize that level of optimism. I think that was very compelling and resonated with me quite a bit last year.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it was fun, and that would be my challenge for people to think about, because I think Vernie switching to, instead of just hourly based billing, to value based billing is a big shift in his industry, and maybe there's a shift you want to make in your company. I'm speaking to the audience here, I guess. And now may be the time to start looking at that, because as change happens, people are more likely to, they may be less likely or more likely depending on how you approach that, but it may be a great opportunity to make some of those changes. So that feels like a great way to close this off. I am going to plug one more time our event next week. Sounds like I should have had you guys in on this. We have some experts on operations and streamlining operations and really looking at a process and how you automate work. We're going to come in and we're going to do a presentation. It'll be this time next week. Otherwise, that is it for today. We're going to close it up. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you around. Give us a call.
Mike, thanks so much for hosting, and Ernie, pleasure to meet you.
Same here, sir. Thank you, Mike.
I'll close with you two should have lunch. I think you'd have a great lunch.
Oh, yeah, I think that's happening.
All right, very good. We'll see y'all. Have a great day.
See you, Mike. See you then.